second. There you go.
Great. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Michael Draskovic. My pronouns are he, him. I'm based in Los Angeles. I was born in San Francisco, but was raised here. And thank you, David, and We All California for hosting this. This is my second time speaking to you all, so it's always great to be back. I think I see some familiar faces from the last time I was here. Today, I wanted to share some of the progress we've made in Los Angeles working towards a deeper democracy. And so I'm going to share updates on 4 different ideas: redistricting, democracy vouchers, citizens' assemblies, and charter reform. Now, many of you may be familiar with these ideas in isolation or policy specific, so I'll give a brief overview of the idea at the top and some background about why they're important ideas to Angelenos here. And then I'll plan to go over some tactics we've used to help push the idea along so that it gets traction. And then I'll end on each of them, kind of what the results have been and where things stand. And so I'll give a very high-level overview of those 4 policy areas and the background on each, the tactics we use, and the results we're seeing. And then from there, I'm hoping we can open up to, and I'll summarize the lessons that we've learned here that I'm seeing. And then I'd love to just open it up for questions so that I can get a sense of, where you're all coming at this work and areas I might need to clarify, and really looking to learn too if folks have suggestions on different tactics and whatnot. So does that sound okay with this group, if that I proceed in that fashion?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I'll start just with a brief introduction. I told you where I'm from, where I was raised, but my first experience with politics happened here in Los Angeles. Los Angeles is one of the few cities in the nation that has a neighborhood council system. There's 99 neighborhood councils throughout the city of Los Angeles, and they had just started when I began high school. And so I was lucky to have one right down the block from my house. And I got involved and was able to see what really participatory, local, super messy democracy looks like. And that experience really stuck with me because after I graduated from school, I went to Washington, D.C., where I worked at an advocacy organization focused on international development policy. And there I saw how really professional, well-organized, highly trained advocacy organizations move policy through the national federal government, as well as various international institutions. And it was an amazing experience. I was around some brilliant people, but I also came away from that experience seeing all the ways in which just ordinary people were involved in crafting those policies. And having come from Los Angeles with this experience in neighborhood councils and seeing the potential of people to really create their own laws and systems of self-government, I wanted to study that some more. So I went to graduate school where I met my current co-founder, Pete Davis, at the Democracy Policy Network, which we founded about 5 years ago. And that organization has a mission to flesh out democratic, lowercase d, democratic policies for state leaders and their staff who are interested in deepening democracy. And so we were solving, in that organization was what we saw as what we called a policy gap. A lot of people wanted to do stuff on racial justice or wanted to do stuff on climate that would really move the needle, or democracy generally. And, most of these folks had just won an election. They were coming off their successful campaign, and now they needed to govern. And a lot of these states don't have resources to hire robust staff. As many of you know, in other parts of the country, they don't even have staff, or they're working in a part-time legislature. So it's really critical for groups to essentially provide that policy support. And so we did that in the form of creating policy kits or policy resources that could be a deep dive comprehensive resource for a state legislator or their staff so that they could begin championing the idea and starting the conversation around a specific policy. And so we published about 20 of those, and you can read them at democracypolicy.network by going to our agenda section, and you'll see them listed there. And so that was kind of the work I was doing nationally, but I really wanted to see if we could move and what it takes to move these kind of bold out there ideas in Los Angeles, where I'm from. And so that is what I spent time doing outside of my work with the Democracy Policy Network on two of the issues that I'm going to be talking to you about today. My hope is, based on what I've learned in Los Angeles, you all can take up wherever you live. And then also, if you have thoughts, I'd love to learn from what you're seeing too. So that's my background and intro. I'd like to dive in now to the first topic, unless anyone has any questions. I can get started there.
No, it's great.
Okay, great. So independent redistricting is the first policy that we're bringing to Los Angeles. Now, this has not been an issue that I've worked on personally. There's been many advocates in Los Angeles working on this for years. Many of you may have heard, like a year ago, or over a year ago, there was a big scandal in Los Angeles where a tape was released that recording a number of city council members using racist language and discussing how they were going to essentially rig the redistricting process to improve their, political chances and what they were able to do when in office. And it really alarmed a lot of Angelenos, and it sparked a whole movement here for reform. And so this issue, which had been kind of on the back burner for at least a year, according to some of the activists working on it, became front and center. And so what the city did was they started a ad hoc committee on governance reform to look at how to bring a independent redistricting commission to Los Angeles. And that committee met over a series of, I think, 12 months, gathering input and recommendations from community members and also tasking our own city's chief legislative analyst, which is essentially the city's official researcher on what best practices they should look at for independent redistricting commission. And so there was, that's kind of the background. Let me give you a sense of some of the work that was done. First, this was heavy coalition work and kind of broke down into three buckets of coalitions. The first was there was a strong group of academics involved from various institutions in Los Angeles who were researching redistricting across the country and writing up research and reports on their recommendations for what a truly independent redistricting body could look at. So there was this really high quality expertise at the table that had organized itself. Then we had a second bucket of grassroots coalition organizations. And these were groups representing working class communities and communities of color. And for a lot of these groups, this was one of the first times they were organizing themselves around good governance issues. And so they were bringing their members up to speed on why independent redistricting is important to our communities. And then lastly, this coalition, I'll call it a trans issue coalition, or this was a group of organizations and individuals representing a range of different interests outside of good governance reform. So we had transportation groups, we had environmental groups, we had housing groups, we had social justice groups, kind of all under this banner of good governance reform. And that was really important because in those coalition meetings, we were able to discern where everyone was at on different parts of how this reform might take shape, and also coordinate resources for organizing. So it was, I think, the first of its kind in kind of this trans issue type of coalition, which was really exciting. There was also a big deliberative polling effort here. So in order to back up the recommendations, a lot of these groups decided to poll Angelenos on what they'd like to see inside of an independent redistricting commission. There was actually two polls, at least two polls done. I think there was a third done by some of the academics as well. This helped just kind of add an additional evidence that there was a desire for this reform, and it helped answer questions for the council members and their staff about, which way to go on specifics of it. So it was a really helpful tool. And I can talk about polling in more detail if folks are interested. There's also lots of teach-ins. So various groups will go out into the city and host teach-ins for their members in different communities. And that was basically teaching people about the redistricting process, how messy it is, how important it is. There were op-eds. And then lastly, we had a digital mapping tool that allowed people to co-create the maps, the city themselves, and make those recommendations to council. So there was a lot going on, and it's hard to say if one thing played a bigger role than another thing, but I'd like to say it all added up to a process that had as many voices as possible at the table with the resources that we had as a city, and it resulted in what's now a likely fall 2024 ballot initiative on an independent redistricting commission styled after the state level independent redistricting commission. And I would say we're generally happy with the result, although we think there were areas that it could have gone further. But I think to know that this was something that, we all did, both electeds and the community, we're pretty proud of. So that's happening in fall 2024. Next up is democracy vouchers, and I'll quickly go through this one here. For those who aren't aware of what democracy vouchers, they are a campaign finance system that started in Seattle, and it's where every resident of the city is issued four $25 vouchers that they can give to any local campaign of their choice, and those campaigns can then redeem those vouchers for public campaign funds. And what they do is they help democratize the campaign finance system. They ensure that no one needs disposable income in order to participate, which helps diversify the donor pool. So it's no longer just wealthy folks contributing, but it's really a pool of people that's representative of the city. It also allows more people to run for office, especially those from historically marginalized communities or those who don't have access to well-funded networks. And lastly, it has a huge participatory effect. So we've seen in Seattle, people who have used their vouchers for the first time, who have been non-voters or unlikely voters, are 6 to 10 times more likely to vote. So it has a kind of psychological effect on the voters that we think is really promising. We see them talking about it, feeling more invested in their community when they use these vouchers. And then just a quick note on the donor pool to give you a sense of its impact there. Before democracy vouchers were in place, you could predict a likely donor based on whether their house had a view of the water in Seattle. And that was, of course, the wealthier areas and often the wider areas. But after democracy vouchers, you can that's no longer true. The donor pool is reflective of the city along dimensions of age, race, and income, and even geography. So it's really a transformative program. The question here is, where does the money come from? I believe they finance their program through a property tax that was, I want to say, $1 a person in the city or something along that line. So, and that passed via ballot initiative. So what we've done here in Los Angeles is we started in 2021, just hosting a series of public events on this, on Zoom, some in person, but open to anyone, just kind of democracy vouchers 101 type events. We've also published some op-eds and local blogs. We've helped people publish op-eds in the LA Times on democracy vouchers. We also, and this is really critical, something I've learned helps a lot, is we drafted motion text. So we had an idea in mind for how we wanted to move the idea through Los Angeles, which is, a huge city. It would take years to get all the groups on board. And that, it's going to be a years-long effort. But in the near term, we wanted to at least have motion text on board ready to go that would help kind of start the conversation in the city. And so we drafted a motion that would instruct our city's chief researcher that I mentioned earlier, this chief legislative analyst, to study what it would take to establish a democracy vouchers program. And then we shopped that motion text around to a few folks in city council, and we were able to identify a council member who was a big champion of this idea, Nithya Raman. And she had experience, raising funds through our campaign finance system in Los Angeles, which we're fortunate to have a public financing system here in Los Angeles, matching funds, which does a great job empowering donors that have the money to spend. But if you don't have that disposable income, it's really hard to contribute to campaigns. So Democracy Vouchers solves that problem. And she wanted to make sure that our campaign finance system was representative of the city's diversity. So we formed a relationship with her office, and then we've been kind of co-creating this policy with her for about a year and a half now. The letter, that motion was introduced last June and passed in the fall. And so we're expecting an official report back from the city any day now, actually, on what it would take to set up a democracy voucher system here. And then lastly, we did a number of coalition letters. That was our way of kind of using the policy itself to organize people we think might be interested in this idea. Same with public events. We co-hosted a lot of our public events with groups we thought might be interested. So I don't think we've done a public event yet that hasn't been co-hosted by various groups. And so that's worked as a great way to kind of pull in a larger audience, but also build buy-in and shared interest in the policy across different organizations. And then lastly, we've done our own research. So we're not just reliant on the city's chief legislative analyst to do this research. Fortunately, Los Angeles publishes some data on, who contributes to campaigns and where money comes from. We've been able to take that data, run our own analysis on it, and based on that, make recommendations for what a democracy vouchers program could look like. And so one of our reports online, if you go to lademocracyvouchers.org, the first page you'll see there, the latest blog post has our most recent report. It's super wonky. It does a good job, though, summarizing all the research that's been done on Seattle's democracy voucher system to date, as well as the research we did into Los Angeles campaign finance system, which looks at where money's coming from generally. So we look at whether it's coming from in the city, from outside the city, from special interests in the city, outside the city, from the city's matching funds program. And so you can see all of that there. And then the last part of the report, we actually start to model the cost of some of these programs, of different versions of the program. So we have a pure democracy voucher program, we have a hybrid vouchers and matching funds program, and then we have a hybrid vouchers and lump sum grant program. And the thinking behind that was we wanted to give council and all of our partners kind of a menu of options that we could use to start more conversations. So some people may want to stick with the matching funds and attach democracy vouchers on top of that. Great, we have a model for that. Others just want to do democracy vouchers. Thank you, David. So anyways, that all is in that report. And like I mentioned, we have the CLA is issuing their report next month that we are looking forward to reading. Okay, next up, and these are going to be quicker because they're newer. We're working on bringing citizens' assemblies to Los Angeles. There's a group called Public Democracy Los Angeles that just started about over a year ago. And they are trying to bring a officially sponsored citizens' assembly to Los Angeles by 2026 on an issue of broad public concern. That group, which I'm a volunteer with, is just getting started. They're doing public events. They've done some private gatherings with foundation, nonprofit, and foundation heads and nonprofit leaders, as well as legislative staff, to start introducing citizens' assemblies to folks. Again, this is all kind of citizens' assembly 101 type information at this point. We also, really interestingly, there was an opportunity. This kind of blends into this last update. Yes. Oh, sorry. Let me introduce Citizens Assemblies. Sorry. So Citizens Assemblies is a really fantastic deliberative democracy, form of deliberative democracy out of Europe, where a body of randomly selected residents or citizens are selected to essentially deliberate and discuss an issue. And so France has used one to discuss climate change, for example. Ireland used one to discuss marriage equality and reproductive freedom. And what it does is it brings people from all backgrounds together. So you have all voices in one room. It's like a city or country in a room. And they're able to hear one another and talk through kind of their different points of view, and then come to recommendations that are usually supported by a majority of the assembly that are then taken to the official body to advise them. So in the case of France, they met for over a year on what should France be doing on climate change, and they came up with 149 policies that they then sent to Macron. And so what we've seen is people who participate in the citizens' assemblies become kind of super citizens. For the first thing is the policy making is completely demystified. They hear from all the experts, they invite experts, they really take seriously the task of understanding from the most diverse body of folks what should be done on a particular issue. And then they take all those data points and then deliberate with their colleagues. And so they come out of these events, they come out of these assemblies feeling very confident in their ability to understand a complex idea and then also to advocate for something. So they're great ways to just engage the public. So in Los Angeles, there's a charter reform movement that's happening right now to open up the city's charter for revision. And the city council asked our city's researcher to look into best practices for charter reform. There's not a lot written on charter reform best practices in the country, which is very, tragic, because these are like mini constitutions. If you live in a charter city, you have one of these. Not every city is a charter city, but if you do, this is kind of these are the rules that everyone agrees to is how we're going to govern ourselves. So there's not a lot of resources on that. And we wanted to make sure that as our city's chief researcher looked into best practices, they also looked into citizens' assemblies. Ireland in 2012 used a citizen assembly for its national constitutional convention. That's continued now for that's been over almost 16 years. And it's been wildly successful in kind of breaking through ideas that are, very tense, or there's gridlock and whatnot. And so we're trying to make people aware that, hey, it's been used for reviewing, citizen assembly has been used for reviewing constitutional documents in the past, has been very successful, and we'd love to see you do that here. Really great news, just last week, the CLA released its report, and our letter was cited in the report. And they are saying, please, Charter Commission, we recommend that you look at the content of this report and consider forming a citizens assembly style charter commission in the future. So while it wasn't recommending that this initial charter reform commission be a citizens assembly, it's now in an official document from the LA City. So that I'll get to how this it relates to one of the ideas that I've come to here in Los Angeles. Just having ideas on the table is really important. And so lastly, charter reform. As I kind of already mentioned this, but the city is exploring it as a way to consider a backlog of charter ideas, charter amendment ideas. Our charter was last reformed in 1999, so it's been over 20 years. Departments have, city departments have a list of amendments they'd like to see. Community groups and advocates have their list. City council has their list. So it made sense to let's do a charter reform to consider all of these. About a year ago, over a year ago, so this would be fall of 2022, when we heard there was initial movement on looking to set up a charter reform, a few of us drafted a motion text asking the city to research periodic charter review commission. This is an idea out of Portland, where every 10 years, the city there calls a charter reform commission to review the city's charter. So as a resident of Portland, you always know there's going to be this periodic review of the city's governing document. We've spoken to folks there involved in that process and learned kind of their mistakes and lessons learned, but also how well it's working, just moving amendments through the city. If in Los Angeles to run a charter amendment ballot initiative campaign, it can cost anywhere from $5 to $7 million. And so to have a charter reform commission regularly meeting every 5 to 10 years just helps open up the possibilities for reform. We don't have to fundraise, go out to foundations and all of that for 5 to 7 million for, just a single campaign. It can all be wrapped up in this. So that motion that I mentioned, which was drafted in the fall of 2022, we never heard, it was drafted for the council. He wasn't the council president then, but he became the council president. Didn't hear anything. It was like radio silence for over a year. And then last fall, he says he wants to do charter reform. And in his motion is the language that we wrote over a year ago. And so it just goes to show you that you never know where these draft motion texts will go, but having them there and just keeping them, on people's radar, reminding them about that, even if they never respond, can result in that. So we're right now still in talks about what that looks like, but the council president at a meeting last week said that he wants this upcoming charter reform commission to consider periodic review. So those are the ideas. I'm going to end really quickly with just a minute on some of the lessons learned, and then I'd love to open up for questions and ideas. So as you've already heard me say, concrete proposals, I believe, are worth 1,000 public comments. Having ideas on the table really makes a difference. It takes a little bit of work up front to do this, but I think it pays off in the long run. We've seen that through our motion with democracy vouchers. We've seen that with our draft motion for the periodic charter review commission. And then we've also seen that with our letter that we sent to city council about citizens assemblies for charter commission. We put together all this research for them, kind of doing the work for them. This relates to the second point, is building a kind of cooperative relationship with lawmakers. So developing an ethos of co-governing. Just because someone is elected or serving in a legislative position doesn't mean that they have all the support they may need. They actually really appreciate people doing the research legwork and organizing legwork. So for them, knowing that an idea has been fleshed out, they know who to call if they have questions, and there's people in the city who support this idea. It's not just one or two folks who are talking about it, but there's groups and coalitions and communities behind it. That also helps, again, de-risk the idea. So a lot of elected officials I've encountered, may really like an idea, but then they're constantly weighing whether to introduce something new with, their other political priorities. So anything you can do to make it seem like a slam dunk or something that will be a fight, but because there's always a fight, but will be a fight, but it's a worthwhile fight because there's enough people on board that'll come to your aid. And then I have just 2 more points. Making expertise accessible. So much of what we've done is going into white papers and research reports and just putting it into terms that a legislative staff who doesn't have a lot of time or elected official who doesn't have a lot of time can understand. So, a 20-page report gets shrunk into a 1-pager, and that gets, passed along, and that they tend to really appreciate. And lastly, to have fun. Okay, this seems kind of silly to say, but I really think having a spirit of openness and cooperation and joy in the work goes a long way. This is a really hard job. As we're seeing across the country, being an elected official or in the public space is really, really challenging. So any amount of joy or a different perspective that you can bring to the work I believe personally, it's my personal opinion, is contagious and can work and help open more doors. So with that, I will close my comments and open up for your questions.
Well, first, thank you so much, and take a glass of water or something. It's great for just being able to share so much information. And between this and all the other work you do, one of the things I love is how you set it up to be leveraged by other people so that, it's not just a one-off, but that it builds a further life past your own work. And so, as a citizen of LA, I'm grateful for all the leadership you're doing and putting in the hard work you're putting in. And also, we are called the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, and we believe that you should experience joy while you're doing all this good work. So I definitely want to affirm that. And I have lots of questions for Mike, but you're all here. So it'd be great if we just give everybody one question at a time so that as many people can participate as possible. If you're off camera, that's totally cool. But if you're able to come on camera, to ask your questions that are great, make it feel like more of a community here to see smiling faces and to express some gratitude to Mike for all the work he's been doing and for explaining it so well. So who has a question first? I don't believe that there's no questions. That's
I'll
unusual.
ask a question.
Aaron, go for it.
Sure. Hey, yeah, thank you so much for the presentation. I live in Los Angeles now, but I used to live in Seattle and I got to vote using the democracy vouchers. And
Wow.
it was very cool experiencing that. And I didn't think to look deeper into it, but it's really cool hearing now how much impact it had on Seattle. And yeah, it was a good system. It was a good system easy system to use as well. Currently, I'm a volunteer with the Star Voting chapter in California, and we try to promote voting methods such as star voting, but also approval voting and a couple of ranked methods as well. And I was curious if voting method reform was floated anywhere in the coalition, or if there's what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, there has been talk. It hasn't been one of the coalition's priorities that I've mentioned, but I think it will be once we have the Charter Review Commission. So I think you will have your chapter will have their hands full as soon as that happens, because they're going to consider, from what I've heard, the entire charter is open for revision, and so that means our electoral systems as well. And I know there are folks within the coalitions who are interested in this idea. They just don't have the staff capacity. So see, even the advocates need policy support. So anything you're able to do to plug into that, I'd be happy to connect you with the coalitions I'm involved in to get you on their listserv, and then you can start coming to the meetings.
Great. Yeah, I'd love to follow up and see how we can help support you. And charter reform does come up a lot. Like oftentimes we're excited, like, oh, where can we integrate star voting? And then we're like, wait, we can actually only do it in these handful of cities that have charter reform already. So that will be a big issue for us for sure.
I just put my email there. Feel free to reach out.
Okay,
And
thank you.
Aaron, back when you did your presentation for us on star voting, I think it was your first presentation and we weren't recording, but might be great to do a new one again that we can record and, maybe hone it down, because I do think not enough people understand why star voting is far superior to ranked choice voting, and I want to help you get the word out. So
yeah, appreciate it. You actually did record it and I can send you it.
Please do. Who else has a question? Great.
Thanks, man. So Michael, first, thanks for your talk. It was enlightening. I really appreciate it, and thanks for all the work you do there. I'm sure you don't get enough thanks for all the long hours you're spending doing this work. A question I posted in the chat was, are you using AI or other exponential technologies to help improve the efficiency and the effectiveness in the work that you do? And the reason I ask is that a few months ago in November, I ran a Green Economy Conference. David was one of our speakers. And One of the components of the conference was that we worked with David Hedon, who was an advisor to Council Member Bob Blumenfield. And we demonstrated AI as a means to improve waste stream diversion, which is something that just David thought up. And, David said that in the course of doing that kind of work without AI, they would look at 5 or 10 other cities for best practices to learn what people were doing. And using AI with David's help, we looked at 100 cities in an association called C40, 100 large cities sharing best practices. But we also looked at 12,000 cities in a group called the Global Covenant of Mayors. This is 12,000 cities in an association specifically to share equal best practices. So we were able to look at 12,100 cities for best practices versus what the staff would normally do, which would be to look at 5 or 10 cities. And so this is a huge opportunity to use AI and the power to reach out across the world. And I think it's something we can't ignore. So we're still talking with Council Blumenfield about how we can do more work like that for them. And we're also talking to the mayor's office about helping to implement Executive Director number 5 from Mayor Bass's office, which is all about bringing city services more effectively and efficiently to the citizens and businesses. So all that to say, are you using AI yet? And if not, can we help?
We are not. And yes, I think for certain challenges the city's facing, I think it's a great tool, especially if there's this robust data available from diverse sources. Campaign finance, I think, could be one of them because a lot of cities have, a lot of cities and states record this information. But I think it's important to not lose sight of, for some of our work like Charter Commission, there's just some basic principles that I think come before any kind of AI analysis, such as, answering the question, who should be responsible and who should participate in this process? That should come from, it's an intrinsic answer, It's like we should have the sense that everyone should have a way to engage in this process, not just the elected officials, not just that. So I'd say the way to balance this, I'm really interested in and would love to see what you all are working in Los Angeles.
Great.
I have a question, comment. So I'm very excited about this sort of emergence of a co-governance model as well.
Yes.
And it seems to try to integrate like authentic representation of the people with the elected officials, which kind of begs the question, why aren't those people actually in office, And I know that you're doing a lot to address that. But there is a sort of, apparently, according to studies, and I don't know if this is completely connected to the campaign finance question, but that the people who run for office tend to self-select, and they're more confident people. They're people who are very effective liars and tend to be very high on the narcissistic spectrum. They they're charming and they portray like, that they're good Samaritans. But this is what we end up particularly at like the higher levels of government. And so I'm wondering if this mitigates that, if there's any studies that show that effect, because it's super important, right? And then a friend also mentioned there's a process called sortition, which is actually like, you've heard of it. Okay. Yeah. Which kind of solves that problem and the campaign finance problem all in one. But it's so radical to this country, I think, because those people who are in power, who want more power, who don't really care about people, don't want to give up the power, and this would completely turn things upside down.
Yes, yeah, I think you've hit on something really important. So, sortition, for those who don't know, is the kind of tool that's used to select people randomly to participate in a citizens assembly. That process is also called democratic lotteries. Polling, representative polling that we see in the news that, says this is, this population believes, 63% of this population believes whatever. The reason they can make those statements with confidence is because their polling data is representative, and it uses a similar kind of style of sortition to select people. Okay, so people are scared of this idea because it seems like we're relinquishing something. We're letting go of the fact that elected officials are, the solely responsible for policymaking. And we can point to what's happening in Europe all we want to say, look, all these amazing results. Life gets easier for advocates. Life gets easier for elected officials. You don't have to take on these big positions anymore. You can say, hey, look, the citizen assembly said we should do X, Y, or Z. Okay. I think in America, we have and this is just my personal opinion, there's a real sense of we just want to get the work done and we want to do it well. It's like a very kind of like matter of fact, let's just, have it work efficiently and produce good results. What we're trying to do in Los Angeles is, relate this idea of citizens assemblies to as many audiences as possible. And one of the messages we're working on is this kind of like, it's going to help everyone. It's going to reduce the stress of the process of charter reform. Instead of having a commission that has to hear from 100 different groups, you have a body of people that represents all sorts of perspectives, that knows kind of when we've heard from we've heard kind of repeat information. They're able to discern information, process it faster than a group of 15 people. And then lastly, the recommendations that come out of it have the cosign of 60% or so of the population already. And so there's all sorts of ways we're just trying to sell it as kind of a matter of fact benefit. So that is how I'm thinking it might play in places like California and elsewhere where there's kind of a risk aversion, and we ultimately just want to make sure that the job gets done. We review the charter well, it's done efficiently, and we can stand behind it at the end of the day.
Yeah, there's also a great book by Brian Kloss about how we select leaders and how to invert that and instead reach out and select people, ask the people who meet the profile we want rather than self-selecting. It's called Corruptible.
Can I ask a follow-up question, David, based on what you just
Sure.
said? Is there any initiative to try and cultivate quote unquote leaders who will be channeled into this that that can receive this public funding, or is it still just going to be all self-selection? Which, I mean, you'll get some good people that way. I chose not to. I was going to run for San Francisco City Council a number of years ago, and I decided not to because of funding. So I don't know. It might make all the difference, but what have you seen, or have there been any initiatives to sort of cultivate people from the grassroots?
Is it Kali? Okay, another great question. So the way sortition works is sort of like how letters are sent out before jury duty. So the city would send out, say, 10,000 letters to people, and it would invite them to participate. And you would have to say yes or no to that initial letter. And then from those that opt in, we then start looking at the demographics. So we want to make sure there's equal number of, there's gender parity, there's, if you want to do homeowner, renter parity, there's racial representation that matches the city's population, a host of things. And so then it's, I forget the technical term, but again, it's what pollsters use all the time. There's kind of a second series of buckets that these people get put in depending on their various traits. And then from that, you then select, you create 100 different panels, 100 different possibilities that would satisfy kind of a representative body of the city. And then from those 100 panels, you select one of them that then becomes the official one. And you invite those 100 people to participate. So that's how it works. There's kind of those several stages, but then you get this truly random representative body invited at the end of the day. You're talking about how to cultivate people who participate in that process. I think that's a really interesting question. And I would ask you, how would you do that? How would you cultivate a culture, a civic culture in which you may be selected to make recommendations on city policy or state policy? How would you ensure that your neighbors are prepared in a way to kind of see all viewpoints and incorporate different people's thoughts and all of that? I would throw it back to you in a way.
Yeah, I mean, practice at smaller levels, I think the participatory budgeting um, project it's been sort of frustrating in the impact of its scope, but I think also a great way for folks to practice direct democracy and really get a taste of it and like their own empowerment and build their skills and see the importance of the work. So, but also some people just do this through like joining, their school council or their neighborhood group or whatnot. Um, but it seems to kind of filter the people who have more time and the people who want more power
This is
seem
true.
to kind of move up those ladders more easily. And we don't really have a system for supporting folks and encouraging folks that, like somebody mentioned the other day on a podcast that their neighbor Betty or whatever is like a great gardener and a great community networker and like all this stuff and that she should be on the city council, but she's never ever going to consider
Right.
running. But she's like got heart of gold, cares about everybody, but people wouldn't necessarily vote for her, and also like they wouldn't think that she was an expert. There's all these, yeah, and
Yeah.
she wouldn't think that she was. There's the internalized vision of like I think a lot of folks in this country think that authorities should be making all the
Yes.
or like experts should be making
Yes.
all and these people a lot of these people aren't even really experts, you know. They're
They're
like
just like
pretending.
us. No, and I think that's what happens. You see people go through a citizens assembly process and their worldview changes because they've seen how policy is made. And so the way that we ensure more people from more backgrounds are able to participate, especially those from working class communities, is to have a serious stipend in place for participation, to have childcare available, all these transportation stipends, all of this. So there's all sorts of accessibility things you can do as well. I want to point out Greg here mentioned his idea for an orientation and training for folks who want to participate. I think it's a great idea, and I know that other assemblies have done that.
Mike, I've got a couple questions for you. First, on the redistricting, are they expanding the number of city council people or keeping it the same?
So that's a separate issue. I should have mentioned that one too. The city's also exploring council expansion. We have 15 council seats right now. I think that's a ratio of one council member to 225,000 Angelinos, something like that. It's the most unrepresentative in the country. And so we are exploring council expansion, or as it's been put another way, smaller districts,
Right,
which seems to resonate with more people. That's a separate conversation from redistricting, related, of course, because redistricting involves the number
sure,
of seats, but I think it's going to be taken up this year by council and possibly punted to the Charter Reform Commission.
sure, that makes sense. And on the democracy vouchers, is the first run at the city council specifically for those elections, or is it after a different group or a different?
Yeah, so I mentioned that we had several models that we put
Yeah,
together to just create that menu for people to look at. Part of that menu is an option that looks at just city council members or just the citywide positions. So we've kind of, it's like an a la carte in a way,
right,
especially because there's a looming budget crisis here in Los Angeles. We didn't want that to prevent the idea from moving forward in just a small way.
right,
So it could really be the whole council all the way up to just like several seats, or all the way down to just several seats.
right. And then my last and final question, and then we're going to move into some wrap up, is for those of us who are either here today and live in Los Angeles or who are watching this later on YouTube, how can we support what the efforts that you're spearheading.
Right. So if you like democracy vouchers and want to see LA's democratic or campaign finance system become more democratic, just go to lademocracyvouchers.org and you can sign up to receive our updates there, or even let us know you'd like to volunteer with us. If citizens assemblies is something you're interested in, you can go to publicdemocracyla.org and do the same there. Also in the chat, I'll put the link again to an event we have coming up next week where we are discussing, just put it in the chat, that there we'll be discussing our plans to bring a citizens assembly to Los Angeles by 2026. And we'll have a number of experts on citizens assemblies there, as well as advocates familiar with our current public comment system and how hard it is for people to participate.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. I'm going to do a little promotion for our group and what we're doing, but also I wanted to let everybody know this is our mascot who currently does not have a name. But on our Instagram, we're having a naming contest. So encouraging people to come and help us give the oxalotl a name. But for those of you who are asking how you could get involved, we do convenings where we have discussions without a main speaker, but where we talk about different topics. We just had our book club tonight. We're talking about organizing for power. That's been really interesting. We're looking to do presentations for other people's group. Rex and Jesse and a couple other people who are here, Jeremy, we're all part of a working group that puts on all these different events. We meet Wednesdays at 4. We're looking to build up our social media, although we got off Twitter, hoping everybody else gets off Twitter. And then we do learning events like this. And if I can figure out how to advance to the next slide, I will show you some of those events. Let's see. February 15th, Matt Bigger, who does a lot of local systems-based consulting, place change, is going to present on that. We've got 2 people, one from Democracy Policy Network, coming and talking about monopolies and inequality. March 2nd is an event that we're not organizing, but participating in a rally in Sacramento. There's 31 state house rallies going on the same day across the country to advocate for a slate of rights for people and inequality. We can get you the information on that. March 15th, we have someone coming from Epic talking about their 2-year listening tour. And then we're going to be talking about metrics and innovations and community engagement in April. And these are all the different ways that you can connect with us, and encouraging people to put into the chat tonight, what other learning topics would you like us to present at future events, so that we can give you things that actually interest you as opposed to what 2 or 3 of us think interest you. So feel free to put those in the chat, reach out and connect to us. Some of us are friendly, not all of us. I'm not going to tell you which ones. You have to figure it out on your own. And trying to think, what else do we want to share? I guess let's just hear from Michael. And thank you so much for sharing all that with us.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, anytime. You're so good at presenting things, and I really appreciate all the work you're doing. So it's open to anyone who's got a comment, a chat, gratitude.
I'd like to just say thanks to you, David, for bringing everybody together, and look forward to working with you and expanding the idea of the well-being economy. And remember at our event in November, we kind of tied that together with donut economics. So that will be an even bigger part of our next conference this year. So I look forward to talking with you offline about how we can work together on that.
Happy to.
I just want to thank you a lot. Hopefully we can move ahead on some of these things. I'm up here in San Luis Obispo County, and we just went through some of those things here, getting our Board of Supervisors a little more aligned with more democratic stuff.
Awesome.
Yeah, I was going to share at the top when David asked what the most interesting thing we did this weekend, I was in SLO with my mom this weekend. the train up from LA. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Anybody else? All right. Well, we'll make it official. The meeting is called to close, and bang the gavel or the axolotl. And Michael, thank you again so much, and look forward to seeing you next week at your meeting.
Yes, thank you.
All right.